All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. First off, can everybody hear okay? If you could just drop something into the Q&A to let me know you can hear. And I'll make sure that everybody can hear me before I move forward. Great. All right. Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for weighing in there. Thanks. And thanks for joining us today. So hi, everyone. I am Morgan here at Jotform. Welcome to today's webinar about accessibility in Jotform. Our session today is going to be a little bit different from our typical product webinars, but we've been wanting to take some time recently to talk about our approach to accessibility, some recent improvements that we've made, and how and where you can learn more. Here is our agenda for today. I am going to start with some background. I am going to show you our accessibility checker tool in action, and I'll be leaving you at the end with a number of resources so you can learn more if you'd like. Before I move on into anything else, let's define accessibility. Accessibility is the process of making the world usable for as many people as possible. And when it comes to technology, that means making your website or your product as usable for as many people as possible. Assessing and improving accessibility is always key to making sure that anybody who wants to use your product can, regardless of their abilities. Our team recently put a week of business as usual on hold to work with an accessibility expert and pour some extra attention into making Jotform more accessible than ever before. We've decided to use this opportunity to restate our commitment to accessibility and to share more with you about how we're doing so. So this Accessibility Week was our first, but it certainly won't be our last. And our work on accessibility is definitely not confined to any particular week. But the focus of this particular Accessibility Week was the ability to easily navigate and build within Jotform using a screen reader. The expert that we worked with, Hassan, aside from being an expert and a leader in the field of accessibility, has been blind from birth. And so he was also able to be a perfect product tester in addition to offering his expertise. The week started with a series of all-hands meetings about how to identify and address accessibility issues, including determining an easy workflow for reporting and fixing bugs or anything else that might come up. From there, the design and development teams broke out into separate sub-teams to each focus on one particular Jotform feature or tool, and they used the week to evaluate the overall accessibility of that team, of their team's feature or product or tool or whatever it was they were working on, and worked with Hassan as needed to improve upon it. One of the highlights of the week was hearing and seeing Hassan be able to use his screen reader to create a form in Jotform and to be able to fill out a form, all of which he was able to do successfully. I'm going to play a brief clip of a screen reader in action. This is not Hassan's recording. You can see some screenshots of his recording here. But I wanted to play an audio clip so you can have, or video clip so you can have a sense of what it's like to use a screen reader if you're not familiar with that. I'm not going to talk over the clip, so just a brief description. You'll be seeing and hearing me navigate from my Forms landing page through creating a form and adding form fields here. So give me 1 second to launch the video and we'll check that out. All right.
Jotform logo product selector, My Forms templates integrations products support enterprise pricing user profile, move one form grid, main. Checked, feedback form, cart, submissions reports apps add to folder move to team or move to trash. Create form, exited main, create a form create or import a form to start gathering data start from scratch use template import form create signable document close, enter dialog, list with dialog list. Form, Jotform form builder. Complement form elements. Basic, tab 1 of 3. List, name list with 3 items. Full name field group, name, edit text, new field added, full name properties.
All right, so if this is your first experience with a screen reader, I know that might have been a little bit harder to follow. But again, I moved from my Forms landing through creating a form and adding fields. And I was able to do that. I used a screen reader Chrome plugin for that. Every screen reader works a little bit differently. What you saw was me clicking on pages within Jotform. That section that I clicked on would get highlighted in orange, and the screen reader would read off the context of that section. And if that speech seemed fast or maybe a little jumbled to you, a few years ago, we worked with another blind tester who said that he normally has a screen reader set to read considerably faster than that. So just to give you a sense of what some of your blind users of Jotform are experiencing. So moving back into accessibility within Jotform, overall, we strive to be a fully accessible platform for you to use as you navigate the system and create forms, as well as for your users as they fill out forms. Jotform is compliant with level A and AAWCAG guidelines by default, and you have the ability to create Section 508 compliant forms. For those of you who are considering accessibility for the first time, if those terms are new to you, WCAG or Web Content Accessibility Guidelines and Section 508 are accessibility compliance standards. Level AAWCAG conformance is used in most accessibility rules and regulations around the world, and it indicates that a site is usable and understandable for the majority of users with or without disabilities. In addition to all of that, any form fields and most widgets include alt text descriptions. Filling out forms on Jotform doesn't require fine motor control, so it's easy for somebody who has physical impairments to use. And Jotform supports standard input mechanisms like user-powered keyboards and pointing devices. In addition to that, all of our default color scheme choices and many of our themes and form templates are accessible. Default color schemes in our classic forms are all accessible. In cards, most are accessible. And there's an option in your form settings to enable a form accessibility checker. That's what I'm going to demo for you in just a minute. When you use the accessibility checker, you'll be alerted to sections or pieces of your form that are not considered accessible, and you'll see warnings and prompts to update them, and it will direct you to those sections. You can also choose to use that checker to add a badge to your form, confirming that it is an accessible form. All right, so far I think I've said accessible or accessibility about 50 times in this presentation. Now we're going to go out into a demo and you'll hear it a bit more. Let me just go back to my slides. There we go. All right, so I'm going to start our demo here. I am on my Forms landing page here where you can see, this is what you see when you log into Jotform. And I'm going to navigate to this accessible form. You should be able to quickly tell that this is in fact not an accessible form right now, but we will make sure that it is by the time we're done here. So what you see here again is a very bright and colorful form. Now, bright colors are not inaccessible by default, but here we don't have a ton of contrast between the form itself and the background, which can be a problem. You see a number of fields that don't have any labels. Generally speaking, for best practices overall, you want to make sure that people know what they're filling out on your form, but this also for accessibility reasons is not acceptable. And we have a captcha at the bottom as well that is not considered accessible. So we'll go ahead and change that too. I'm going to move from my Build tab to the Settings tab, and I'm going to stay on this Form Settings menu here and click Show More Options. And about halfway down the page is where we'll see the accessibility checker. So you see that here, Form Accessibility. It is disabled by default, but we'll go ahead and turn that on. And it's showing me right off the bat that I have 7 accessibility issues in this form. I have created a pretty extreme example here so I could show you a number of different ways the accessibility checker works. I'm also going to click the box to show the accessibility badge on my form. All right, so now when we go back to the Build tab, you see a number of warnings. First things first, we see a warning here that the form doesn't include a submit button. So again, generally speaking, you want to make sure that people can submit to your forms when you have forms that you're using. So I am going to go ahead and make sure I add a submit button. Sorry, lost my page here. There we go. So I'm just going to click on the warning here, and you can see that that's automatically adding in a submit button. So if I go back up to the top, that accessibility warning is now gone. You also see the warning about the color contrast that I mentioned. So again, generally speaking, this is not a great color contrast for somebody who's has visual impairments. Somebody who's colorblind, for example, might not be able to tell the difference between the form and the background. So once again, I'm going to click on that, and that opens up the form designer. All of our default schemes here are marked with an accessibility icon, letting you know that they are considered accessible. I can also just change one of the colors here until I get something that does have a bit more contrast. And you can see now that I've done that, that warning has disappeared as well. Next, we have an image here that has no alternative text. Alternative text provides a description of an image so that somebody who's using a screen reader, somebody who can't otherwise see the image, knows what it is. In this case, this is just a random image that I'm including, but it's always important to have alt text, especially if you have a form that has images that you absolutely need. So if you're selling something and you need an image of that product displayed, or if you have a quiz where students are being asked to write about an image, for example, those are cases where you really need to make sure that you have alt text so that somebody who's using a screen reader knows what's included here. So in order to change that, I'm going to click on the fields and I'm going to look for this gear widget icon to open the properties menu. And I'm going to move from the general tab to advanced. And the first line here is where I can add in alternative text. So I have a brief description here, white rectangle with multicolored bubbles in different sizes. So I have now added that in, and now that warning has gone away as well. Next, we have a couple of warnings about labels and sublabels. So I mentioned at the start of this demo that these fields don't have labels. That is not great, generally speaking, for your forms. You want to make sure that people know what it is that they are giving you, what they're writing down here. So also for accessibility, if you're using a screen reader, the screen reader doesn't have anything to latch onto here. It doesn't have any way to translate what these fields are. So again, I'm going to click on one of these warnings and that highlights the field where I can update this. I'll add my name label. In this case, name has 2 subfields, so it's really important to make sure that there's a sublabel as well. So I've now added first and last names. Again, now everybody using this form will know what it is they're filling out. Same thing with my second field. This is an email field, so I'll go ahead and add the label. Sublabel isn't necessary for accessibility in this case, but it's always good practice, so I'll add that as well. And finally, we have the CAPTCHA here at the bottom. If you are using a CAPTCHA, just be aware that this particular Jot CAPTCHA is not considered accessible, but H and reCAPTCHA both are, so you can still include that CAPTCHA. So now that I've switched that to reCAPTCHA, again, this is something that somebody using an assistive device can understand and can fill out, and that is considered accessible. So I've now updated all of those. My form is considered accessible. If I go back to my settings menu and open that menu back up and look for my form accessibility field here, now we can see we have no accessibility problems. And if I go into publish and open this up in a new tab, we can see what somebody who is using this form will now see. So they do see a higher color contrast, they see labeled fields, they see a CAPTCHA that they can use and a submit button. You can't see the alt text here, but if somebody's using a screen reader and they're listening to this page, then they will also know what this field includes as well. All right. Let's go back to the slides here. And so I've talked a bit about how Jotform supports accessibility, but part of that is what you can do for accessibility as well. So a lot of what I've just shown you, again, there's some of that that's automatically built into Jotform, but when it comes to adding in labels, sublabels, alt text, etc., that is something that is up to you. So we are bringing you part of the way. So just some general stuff. I have covered some of these already, obviously. You can enable that accessibility checker so that you can have warnings on color contrast, fields, widgets that don't have alt text, etc. That also allows you to add in that accessibility badge. Generally speaking, you want to choose those high contrast colors for optimum visibility for all users. Make sure that you're including those labels and sublabels. Again, that is general best practices for any form, but it also means that screen readers have a way to translate what that is as well. Same thing for images, make sure you're including that alt text. A couple of things that I haven't covered already, keep your forms and form language as simple and as straightforward as you can. This means that the majority of users will be able to use them. You want to keep your language at an elementary school level for the most part. Just again, generally speaking, form best practices, keeping your forms clear and short makes the most sense overall for forms. The shorter, the less effort a form is, the more likely somebody is to fill it out. But you also want to consider folks who might have an intellectual disability or a physical disability that makes it harder for them to, to use the form. So keep your language simple and straightforward. And finally, avoid special fonts or blinking or flashing text. I like to think of this as like the anti-early internet rule. In the early days of the internet, we saw a lot of GIFs or GIFs or flash images or blinking text, highlighted colors, etc. Avoid that as much as possible. There are a number of fonts that are really difficult to read, just generally speaking, but some that can't be translated. And anything like that, blinking or flashing text, etc., just makes it hard, generally speaking, but also for assistive devices to pick up on that. All right, so lastly, I'm going to leave you with some resources, and I have a number of those for you here. I have a couple of resources at the top here about the experience of using Jotform while blind. So if you are interested in learning more about our Accessibility Week, my colleague Luke wrote an excellent blog that gives you more detail on behind the scenes, including images. This blog also includes a video with Hassan, our tester, and our expert here. He gave about a 2.5 minute interview. He's super enthusiastic and he's really knowledgeable about accessibility overall. He's kind of been a leading force in accessibility in Turkey. So I definitely recommend checking that out, even if just for the interview with Hassan. I mentioned earlier that we had worked with a blind person a couple of years ago about testing our forms. We also have a blog about that as well. So if you are interested in learning more and hearing an individual case study or reading an individual case study, that's an excellent resource as well. The next couple of resources are pages on the Jotform site where you can learn more about, again, how we support accessibility and what you can do as well. This link here, the third one down, is our accessible forms landing page. So you can learn all about the features that support accessibility here at Jotform. That also includes a link to our FAQ about accessibility. So if those terms that I mentioned, the compliance standards, are new to you and you'd like to learn more, that's a great resource. This also links to our VPAT, voluntary product accessibility, not template. I always forget what the T stands for, but it links to our VPAT, which is a self-evaluation of all of the ways that Jotform supports accessibility. So you can see all of the details there as well. Piggybacking on my last slide about what you can do, and really this whole presentation, we have a help page where you can learn more about creating accessible forms, so more about what you can do. And finally, my colleague Annabelle did a great webinar a few years ago about Jotform's accessible forms and about that checker, the accessibility checker. There's a bit of overlap with this session, but that's also a great resource. She goes a little bit more in depth about background. So again, if you're somebody who learns from watching videos, that would be an excellent resource for you as well. I know there's a lot here. I'm going to leave this up. We will also link to these in the description when we post this on our YouTube channel, so you can see these links there as well. But if you want to take a screenshot or get your camera out for those, I'll leave that open during Q&A. See, we have a couple of questions here. Will we receive a follow-up email for this webinar with the slides? Absolutely, yes. So you should receive an email within the next week with a link to this recording. It doesn't usually have the slides attached per se, but you will see the video. And again, you can also find this and any other webinars and other videos from us on our YouTube channel. That it will be up on our YouTube channel as soon as the session's over today. So that's youtube.com/thejotform. You can find all of our videos there. You will see this there as well. And we will link to all of these resources in the description there. Okay, another couple questions. In what ways can a longer form be accessible and not appear overwhelming? That's a great question. I think a lot of that goes back to, again, general best practices for your forms. You want to, again, keep your forms as simple and straightforward as possible and use clean, easy to understand language. Make sure that you're not going overboard on highlighting or underlining or bolding text or interesting, new fonts is not the best time to experiment with fonts. Generally speaking for forms, again, you want to keep them as short as possible. So make sure that you're eliminating any redundancy in questions. You can use conditional logic to skip sections if somebody has a particular answer. We have a couple of resources, just generally speaking, about general form best practices, and a lot of it would conform to that. So if you want to get in touch with me, I can send you some more resources about that. But my other tip, again, would be to use that accessibility checker and, just, update anything that comes off as inaccessible on your form from the start. Can we add alt text for header images? Yes, that is a great question as well. Let me pull my form back up and we'll look at that. So here in the form, let's go back to the build page. Here in the form, again, I've added an image here. This is an image field, so that's just one of the form fields on the side here. But in your headers as well, you can also add images. So if we go ahead and add a heading here, I can open up the properties menu and add an image. We'll just use the same one selected. So now we have that header image added. You can add headings anywhere throughout your forms, but you can see as soon as I've added the heading image here, we have a couple other fields pop up about sizing. But the first one that you see there, the first field after the image itself, is an alternative text space. So that's where you can add alt text for heading images right before you get to any of the other settings. All right, so I think we're about out of time. I'm not seeing, I think I got to all of the questions. If you have any additional questions, feel free to get in touch with me directly. I'm Morgan@jotform.com, MORGAN@Jotform. I'd be happy to share any of those resources or send you a link to this directly. And we will be back in another week and a half with our next webinar. So stay tuned for more information on that, and hopefully we'll see you next time. Thank you.